last year. So this is an award. I'm the awards committee person in the department, so we give this out annually. Students can apply, and it's to support travel. Often students do it over the summer after the term ends, to support travel and research in the area of art history. And Michael Misanchuk was an honoris graduate of our department a dozen years ago or more, who majored in art history, and then tragically passed away when he was very young, and the family established a fund in memory of Michael to support the student to do further research in art history. So there are a few posters around the department. The application deadline is the end of January, and the grant criteria, people have to have completed 12 credit units in art history with a minimum CPA of 85% on all art history courses, which Cole met. And then we just ask you to submit a letter outlining what you would like to do for your travels to Tim Nowlin, the department head. And then Tim, myself as a committee member and staff in charge of awards in the university review those. Usually students will be awarded the money after they've traveled unless you have some circumstances that would prohibit you from traveling. Then you might be able to receive the money in advance as long as you return it. So all the details are on this poster, so just keep it in mind if you're interested and have a kind of project in mind. It's good to be somewhat specific, as was told about, research what exists, what exhibitions are going to be in New York City if you want to travel there, or Europe, or wherever, and put that into your proposal, not just like I want to wander around. Be more specific, the better for you. So Marcus is going to introduce. Oh, wherever Marcus went.
I'm right here. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm really happy to introduce Cole Thompson here, who's been a student here at the university for a number of years now. He's set to graduate this April. He's been a stellar student, and he's been involved in a number of areas and disciplines. He's going to get a double honors in art history and regional and urban planning. He was in the College of Engineering from 2011 to 2012, but I guess he's going over to the dark side, as I was telling him earlier today. He's, as I said, he's a stellar student. He's received he's on the Dean's Honor List for 2013-14, 2012-13, 2011-12 for Engineering Dean's Honor List. He's had 2 undergraduate scholarships. He works at the Canardine Art Gallery and the College Art Galleries, and was a volunteer there for a while. He's a volunteer writer at the Sheaf student newspaper. What else can I say about him? He's going to be a great art historian, we hope. And this is going to give us a little taste. So, Cole Thompson.
Thank you. I think I need to get you an updated CV. There are a few things on there.
Yeah, okay.
Great. So yeah, thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks to the award committee for selecting me for this travel scholarship. And a special thank you to the Misanchuk family as well for funding the scholarship. I think it's probably one of the best things you can do to supplement the university education, not only just going and doing work, but experiencing new environments, new places. It's very, very stimulating, very inspiring, and I think that's a very good partner to university education. So if you are eligible, I'd highly recommend looking into submitting a proposal, looking at something that interests you, putting forth a thoughtful proposal, because I think as students in art and art history, it's a really, really wonderful, we're very fortunate to have that opportunity available to us. So I am Cole Thompson. So my proposal was to travel to Philadelphia and New York. And it was based on certain exhibitions that were showing those cities, as well as a personal desire I had to visit those places, as I had never been to either city before. So since I began studying art history, I've always been particularly interested in Dada work, for its sort of subversive qualities. It's very mischievous, it's politically and socially engaged characteristics. And New York, once being a hub of Dada activity, as well as Philadelphia being home to a very extensive collection of Dada work, especially that of Marcel Duchamp. They've been places I wanted to visit for quite some time. So I went for 2 weeks in August. I spent 5 full days in Philadelphia, 8 full days in New York City. During this time, I visited a lot of galleries. So, you know, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Perelman Building, MoMA, PS1, Dia Beacon, I went to the Aperture Foundation, just sort of went to a lot of different things. But in terms of my research or how I proposed the trip, I wanted to specifically look at Dada work, and then since there were very good collections in both those cities, and then using that, sort of looking at Dada's relationship to mid-century and contemporary art production, and looking at the sort of links between those and what kind of characteristics Dada sort of began with Dada work. So it's kind of, this is sort of just like a broad overview of selected from works that I've viewed, but feel free to ask any questions or jump in if anything comes up. So one of the chief exhibitions that I went to visit was Dada Globe Reconstructed. So Dada 2016 is actually the 100th anniversary of the inception of Dada in Zurich, Switzerland. So at the Museum of Modern Art and previously at a museum in Zurich, this Dada Globe Reconstructed exhibition was on view. So, and it was specifically for the 100th anniversary of Dada's inception. So Dada began in Zurich at the Cabaret Voltaire in 1916 with figures like Tristan Tzara, who's a Romanian poet who would soon be the ringleader, basically, of the Dada movement. Hugo Ball, Emmy Hennings, Sophie Teuber, John R., Marcel Yanko. They were kind of the original sort of nucleus in Zurich. So it was an artistic and literary movement that was born out of the atrocities of World War I. They had strong left, very anti-war, anti-capitalist sentiments, very anti-bourgeois and anti-establishment, anti-art, so it was very anti-movement. And they were highly influenced by Cubist collage composition, abstraction as well. They didn't really want to be constrained by reality. And language was a huge part of their movement, and the sort of disconnect between language and meaning a lot of times. So they felt that sort of rational capitalist and nationalist thought was responsible for the war. So their response was to create work that was irrational and shocking. It became an international movement with sort of nodes developing in Berlin, New York, Paris, Cologne, as well as other cities. And it had a larger social goal too of awakening the public to their realities. It was very socially engaged with it. So Dada was a publication that, it was a proposed publication. It was Tristan Tzara's brainchild in 1920. And it was meant to be a publication. It was basically an anthology of the international Dada movement, and it wanted to encapsulate the whole Dada movement and culture. So it was meant to have between 150 and 350 pages. They were going to print an enormous amount of copies, like he was proposing that they print 10,000 copies of Dada Globe. But it went unrealized due to financial issues and infighting amongst the Dadaists. So in 1920, Tzara sent out letters on Dada movement stationery. He was soliciting submissions for the publication. And he sent those to 50 artists in 10 different countries, and looking for photographs, like self-portraits, photographs of artworks, drawings, or designs for pages in the book. So the response was incredible. The mail sort of just piled up, and some works were already made and submitted, but a lot of the works were made specifically for the Dada Globe publication. So it actually it spearheaded a lot of artistic production in the Dada scene. So I'm just kind of going to use Dada Globe, go through that to sort of, I think in this exhibition a lot of the characteristics of Dada are encapsulated, and then after that I'm going to look at a couple key things that I think Dada is very responsible for in terms of contemporary production and sort of mid-century work. So this is a letter to Theo van Doesburg. So there were 50 of these sent out to a variety of different artists internationally. So this is Theo van Doesburg of the Distill movement. This is from Tzara soliciting work. So yeah, 50 of these were sent out. So there's a huge collection of different ones. The exhibition was really correspondence heavy, so it was quite interesting to see a lot of these connections. This is a response letter from Monterey to Picabia and Zara. So one thing that I've kind of noticed throughout, I mean, Dada was a very, or it's been probably described as a very like masculine, sort of machoistic. It was sort of almost a misogynistic movement in a way. It was very focused on this male genius, and you can kind of see this mentality even in these letters, right? If you read through here, he's talking about Elsa Freytag Loringhoven, as well as Edel Lacroix, who are female members of the movement, talking about the contributions by the two ladies are under separate cover, and I have been asked to return them if possible after you are through with them. The contributions, not the ladies. So there is definitely like this sort of cult of male superiority throughout the whole movement, and it's sort of interesting because a lot of the sort of more avant-garde movements of the time were very male-oriented. However, Dada did have a lot of very influential and female members that were contributing a lot. So there's still sort of this, they're still sort of glazed over in the history of the movement, and I think that's something that's probably should be considered a little more highly with this movement. So this is an installation shot of the portrait sent to Zara. He asked for a photo of head, not body, which you can alter freely, although it should retain clarity. So with those sort of constraints, you already see a lot of the members sending portraits that are plays on that or challenging that idea that they should retain clarity or altering the images. So, this is a portrait sent by Andre Breton, who would later be the founder of Surrealism. And he's holding a sign made by Francis Picabia. This is a portrait from Theo van Doesburg. The text reads, "I am against everything and everyone," and also sort of this idea of turning away, right? The self-portrait convention is sort of showing your face. Interestingly, at this time, the League of Nations was actually calling for standardization of European passports. These portraits were really responses to this sort of fixed institutional identity that the League of Nations were calling for. So they sort of subverted this notion in their dotted globe portraits, and you see a lot of alterations. You see a lot of like alter identities, lack of clarity. So that was sort of a response to that sort of institutionalization of the portrait. These are some drawings that were submitted. So I'm not sure of the far left, but second from the left is Van Doesburg, then Shocks Edwards, Zara and Picabia. You see that very mechanical machine aesthetic or sort of a collage aesthetic as well. Then they were asked to send photos of artwork as well. So this concept was definitely played with by many of the artists that submitted work. One being Monterey, so this is man on the left and woman on the right. So these were ready-made sculptures that were disassembled after photographing. So it wasn't really a photo of a work, but a work to be photographed. And it also played with that notion of the photograph being a copy, but there really being no original. So they were sort of playing with that. Duchamp sent in a photograph of Bride. In this case, it wasn't just about disseminating the work, but it was about his interest in mechanical reproduction and having a work that was so highly influenced by that, but then also using mechanical reproduction of the photograph that create a conversation between the two. Hannah Hawk, this is her submission of a cut with the kitchen knife. So this is actually fragments of the work that already exists. So it's already a very chaotic and fragmented work already. So she actually wanted to elaborate on that more by just sending pieces of the work. It also is an interesting document from an art historical standpoint too, because you can actually see, they point out differences between this photographed work and the sort of original work that we have now. So you can see she was actually adding and taking things away to sort of have a bit more of an insight to the process behind the work. And Sophie Toiber, this is her data composition flathead on the left, and then the photograph on the right. So during the exhibition, they actually had many examples where they had the original work and then the photograph of the work beside it, what was actually submitted to the publication. So this is an interesting sort of play as well, because what she has on the left is a 2D composition of 3D sculpture, which she did called Data Head. So she's making this 2D composition to be photographed. But her play here is that when photographing a work, it has to become 2D anyway, so it's sort of this humorous extra step. So sort of interrogating the process of photography and the conceptual implications of photographing artwork. So nothing really goes unnoticed. Uninvestigated things. And this is sort of the last thing I have from the Data Globe exhibition. So they were actually asked to design book pages. So Zara put out constraints. He said he wanted no more than 2 colors and things that could be photographed well. So these were Johan Var's submissions. So he asked for specifically, when he replied, to make exact copies, 3-dimensional with their true color and all original materials. And if the book cannot accommodate this, do as you think best according to your discretion and your sense of arbitrariness. So even within the movement, they're questioning that limitation, questioning authority and constraint within the data circles. So I think a lot of the I actually have a few installation shots as well of the entire exhibition. So it was actually really very extensive. There was a lot of work, a lot of correspondence, and it took a long time to get through. This is, you see, there's the shop work, Francois sculpture in the back.
Cole, this was in Philadelphia, or?
Oh, sorry, no, this is in New York. This is at the Museum of Modern Art. So this was, yeah.
Now, I noticed in the first slide that you had, there were references to the publication that Zara never put out.
Right.
So did they put out a publication?
What they did actually, and I think I brought it with me. I guess I could gather as well. But it is what they did was there's in a Data Globe reconstructed publication. There's some essays at the start, but the backside is actually as close as I could come to reconstructing what it might have been like. So as far as there was a lot of literary submissions as well. So it's this mix of literary submissions and all the work you see here. But some of the pages were actually, like on the original sort of manuscript pages, were numbered. So they're actually able to go back and recreate a lot of it, how it might have been.
Fantastic.
So that is the sculpture. There is the 3D Data Head by Toiber. So I think the Data Globe really sort of encapsulates a lot of the sort of core concepts of the data movement and a lot of things that would become very important moving forward as far as the mid-century and contemporary art production. Now these things that I'm sort of going to talk about are not exclusive to data. Like there are many other things that contribute, but I think these are very central to data art production. I think they're the things that you see carry on very evidently in work following it. So one other thing that I read in the Data Globe publication that was kind of interesting is that data initially, probably until the 50s and 60s, was always sort of understood and exhibited as a precursor to surrealism. When it was first, like the first non-data exhibition was in '36 at the Museum of Modern Art, it was exhibited alongside a lot of surrealist work. And it was sort of, it was basically thought to be a precursor to it, and never really seen as an autonomous movement. But in the 50s, when like Zara was sort of older and scholars were sort of talking with him, there was sort of this renewed interest in data work and sort of examining it as its own as its own movement, especially after Zara's death. So things like the Dada Globe publication really until the sort of mid-50s were actually thought to just be sort of hoaxes on Zara's part, until scholars actually talked to him and saw, the incredible amount of work he had from those publications, that they really start to sort of take a renewed interest in the Dada movement. So that sort of started in the 50s. And during this time of academic interest in Dada, it really correlates to a lot of movements that it spurred. So in terms of like Fluxus and Neo-Dada and pop art and that sort of whole movement, it sort of correlates to when Dada was being reinvestigated again. And the suggestion is that because it was being reinvestigated, a lot of these artists had access to see it and view it in ways that they may not have before. So it's also kind of an interesting commentary on sort of chronological, smooth art historical narrative, right, where there's these disconnects between when things are happening and when they become relevant again and when they're significant. So I just picked out sort of five key things about Dada, and I sort of used these as frameworks for viewing other work on the trip, and sort of tried to slot them in and make sense of it a little bit. Obviously, a lot of this work I'm going to look at would fall under numerous or all of these categories, but I've just sort of tried to break it down a little bit. And so I'll kind of go through those, and after that, if there are any questions or anything else comes up. So I looked at material liberation, or the found object, an emphasis on language, mischief as a theme, chance in art production, as well as the artist's changing role to have a more socially or politically engaged agenda. So first looked at found object. So this first work, this is in the Philadelphia Museum of Art collection. So this is God. This is by Warren Schomburg. And recently they've actually attributed this to, or they've accepted that it could be possible that Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven, the female Dada artist, could have possibly made this work. For the longest time, it's been attributed to Warren Schomburg. So it's a regular commercially available plumbing trap. They're using these commercially available goods in the creation of art. But it is interesting because, so in this instance, they do attribute it to Loringhoven on the tag at the museum. However, there's also been a lot of discussion and very good argument for the fact that she too may have created Fountain. It's more in line with her overall body of work. She uses a lot of plumbing, sort of reference to washroom washroom themes, and it would make more sense in her overall body of work. And there is correspondence between Duchamp and other people saying that he received the work from a female friend of his, and he was close with her. So there is a lot of
scandalous.
It's very scandalous, but it's interesting because that is a very obvious absence from the museum. Right? At Philadelphia, Duchamp is basically, he's the big draw. He's sort of the poster boy, right? So on the Schomburg work, it's included as a possibility, but really there's no discussion of that in this situation, even though it would probably make a little more sense. But yeah, it is suggested that she signed it, gave it to Duchamp, who submitted it. Good.
What was her name?
Her name is, she goes by the Baroness Elsa Freytag-Loringhoven. So it's kind of like the word.
Do you know if it was originally mounted vertically or horizontally?
I believe, as far as I know, in terms of how it's ever been exhibited, it's always been horizontally on its backside.
Not the actual position. That's one.
Yeah. That's sort of the artistic move, right? To take something that's just a regular object, right? To exhibit it in. But yeah, so it's sort of an interesting discussion. But regardless of that, I think it's Yeah, so I think that sort of ties into what I was saying earlier about these female contributions kind of being glazed over in certain aspects where it's maybe not convenient to sort of reopen these very like canonized art historical stores. So regardless, you see this sort of influx of like commercially available found objects being used in art production. And one artist who I saw a lot of work from is Dan Flavin. He uses commercially available fluorescent tube lighting. He has this very extensive body of work using those materials. He's a minimalist artist, and sort of interesting. He uses it. They're basically used as sculptural items, but creating a really impressive spatial effect. So this is a diagonal of May 25th. He calls this one, and this is a larger installation at Dia Beacon. So it's actually a wall of green fluorescent lighting dividing the entire basement in half. So it's a very large work, and I mean it fills the entire space.
What is the original function of this basement?
This was I believe the whole building was a Nabisco factory. Is that? It had an industrial. It was basically like industrial. They produced goods. I'm sorry. It's like it was they produced goods. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it was an industrial building converted into an art gallery. Pretty recently. The Dia Beacon used to be in New York, and I'm not sure the exact date when it moved, but it would have been in the last 15 years. So they converted that old factory into an art gallery. So it's really nice. It's right along Hudson, and really nice space. This is an interesting space too, because as you stay in there, your eyes adjust, and it just becomes white fluorescent lighting, and then when you exit, everything has sort of a purple haze over it.
So it doesn't look green as it does here?
At first, this would be like how it would look, but after being in there for a few minutes, it basically like your eyes would adjust. Yeah, correct. Yeah, so.
Is that a more recent installation? Is that a more recent one?
I think so. Yeah, I'm not sure how long it's going to be installed for.
Found objects and found spaces.
Exactly.
What would the date of that be?
This one is.
More or less.
It would be this diagonal one. So he sort of started doing those in the '60s. He passed away in the early to mid '90s. So this would probably be a later work, I'm guessing. But I don't actually know exactly what this one. So. Somewhere between 63 and 90. So another artist using sort of found object or using commercially available goods, Nam June Pak. So he was the Korean Fluxus video artist. He's very essential in the history of video art, but he was actually really the first to use TVs as sculptural objects. So this work here is a Zen for TV. This was at MoMA. This is one candle. So this is sort of an interesting one too, where he's just actually using the shell of the TV. He's gutted it out. He's actually replaced the internals, which would regularly produce light, and is actually exchanged with a live candle. So this was at MoMA PS1. They did it was actually the 40th anniversary there, so they did a 40th anniversary show where they had a lot of the artists who showed in their very first show come and recreate or reproduce works in the same spaces. And of course, like Rauschenberg's Combines. This is a band from 1955, highly influenced by the idea of the found object, where he's actually using his own comforter, sheets, pillows, and has actually attached those to canvas, has made markings on them. It's sort of a self-portrait, very sort of intimate self-portrait. But he was an artist who definitely utilized the found object heavily. And actually, this was an artist I had never was not familiar with before the trip. Virginia Overton. She's a contemporary American artist based out of Tennessee. But a lot of her work used found objects in relation to modernism. But they're really very like a sort of more sensitive, subtle, sort of emotional use of the found object. So it's not really the found object as being subversive or anti-art, but as being very poetic and expressive. So this was at the Whitney. She had a sculptural exhibition there. This is actually at the Philadelphia Institute of Contemporary Art. Her installation is on the back wall. So she actually installed cedar planks, and they are planks taken from Tennessee cedar, so where she's from. So it has to do with her own past and her own upbringing. It's a really subtle work, but it's really interesting because the scent from the cedar actually populates the entire gallery space. So it has this very like soft kind of memory-laden quality to it. But yeah, she's definitely, her artistic practice is one I was unfamiliar with and one that was very, very interesting. So then also the emphasis on language and titles, puns, using text in work. That was a huge component of the Dada movement. And you see this in works like Duchamp's Fresh Widow, where he's actually taken a French window and has placed leather on the back side of it to make it basically you can't view through it like you would a regular window. It's actually a smaller version of a French window. But the play on words is French widow, fresh widow, and it's actually commenting on this abundance of widows following World War I. So language plays a really important aspect of this work, as it does in many Dada work. And artists like Richard Hamilton were highly indebted to Dada, especially Duchamp. He was very much interested in his practice, but you can see the play on words here too being very essential to the work. So this is Carafe. This is from 1978. So it's a bottle, a commercially produced bottle, using the French liqueur Ricard. What he's done is he's added the age, he's appropriated the logo to sort of put his artist's signature on it. And it's sort of a ready-made as well with the wordplay text, but it's also suggesting the artist as brand. So language playing a very important role in that. And he did a series of those as well. So this is the ashtray from 1979, which would have a similar. And liquor companies produced ashtrays. Oddly enough, I was at a bar in Philadelphia that was the second. I came in, sitting there, and people were smoking, but I didn't really. It was kind of an old, dungy place, so I wasn't worried about. And second last bar in the city to still allow smoking. So when they did that, their grandfather did it, and they decided not to. So they had ashtrays like this all over the place. It was a new experience.
Is it plastic?
This one is ceramic, I believe.
I've got one like that.
Yeah.
And it is plastic.
Oh, it's plastic. Okay.
Mine is plastic, yeah.
Very attractive, but it burns.
It does.
It's colors.
It's beautiful.
This is a work by Nauman as well. So this is at B&B Place. So this is Body Pressure. This is from 1974. So it's an entirely text-based work. But what it is a series of directions for the viewer to perform with their bodies. So it's put your left shoulder against the wall, apply pressure. Put your palms against the wall, apply pressure. So you go through these steps, and at the end, the punchline is this could be a very erotic exercise. Right? So it's taken the form of these regular text instructions. But one of the really neat components of this too, in regard to language, is that there was also a takeaway. So it sort of harkens to this idea of text distribution in newspapers, pamphlets, magazines, and things that aren't really typical of artistic practice in really large quantities. But that was actually something the Dadaists were very interested in, was this idea of disseminating their ideas and publishing and making it like highly available to a lot of people. So I thought that was sort of an interesting connection. But it sort of subverts this idea of the original as well. So then mischief, obviously a huge component. So they use it to attack, critique art world structures. But these attacks are often really humorous. They're kind of tongue-in-cheek jabs. They're quite playful a lot of times. As seen, of course, with the ready-mades. This is an installation of Duchamp's ready-mades at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. They are all replicas except for the chocolate. They're all replicas, but obviously attacks on convention and the art world, the artistic genius, that kind of thing. So very important. But they're had a very mischievous quality as well. But then in the 60s, Piero Manzoni, the Italian artist, he was probably one of, if not the most mischievous guys around. So he did a lot of work that. So he was a great mischief maker. Looking at this is Artist Shit from 1961. So looking at the relation between human production and art production, that's been the suggestion. But I think it's more of an attack on the art market, on critics, on galleries, that sort of thing. On the label contents, it's Artist Shit, contents 30 grams, freshly preserved, produced in tin, May 1961. And I guess the sort of the tale behind this is that his dad once told him that your art is shit. So he literally, produced artist shit. And it's the implication is that art markets and art connoisseurs will literally buy any old shit that an artist put his name on it. So yeah, but he did artist breaths where he would blow into a balloon, sign them off, sell those. Lots of different things he did. Podium for the World, where he just took a podium and turned it upside down. It's just very, very playful, very, very mischievous.
There's no best before date on it,
Yeah, I was wondering about that. I don't know. I guess it's sealed up. Ideas of chance also very, very important in the Dada movement. So, sort of that idea where you sort of remove this sort of individual, sort of meditated aspects of art production, sort of revel in the idea of the accident, irregularity, and processes being really important to artistic production. And in a way, it's sort of freeing the artist from this burden of what to represent or what to express. So this is Duchamp's 3 standard stoppages. So it's a meter of string dropped from above, and as the string drops, it takes on a different form. So it's about a chance practice. It refutes the rational idea of measurement, complicates the idea of measurement, because technically it is 1 meter, but it's not a meter you can measure with practically or has any utility. Right? It's curved. He's created the sticks up top, so it's sort of about that chance idea. One artist who I definitely became very acquainted with, he had a ton of work in Philadelphia and quite a bit in New York as well, as Ellsworth Kelly. So this is Light Reflection on the Water. This is from 1951. So what he's actually done here is he's taken a regular found piece of accounting paper, so using the found object, and has basically filled in the grids at random, just using sort of chance operations to fill them in. And what he's actually done here is to sort of evoke the surface, this sort of reflective, changing surface of the Seine River in Paris. So he would also, his practice was largely influenced by Duchamp and chance practices. For some of his work, a lot of the studies were done by finding found pieces of colored paper, arranging those pieces of paper by chance in sort of grid-like squares, and he'd use those as studies for larger paintings where he'd actually do one canvas per square and then assemble them as large bodies of work. So this idea of chance is sort of removing yourself from having to choose what to represent. I think that's a large part of this. This is a work by Nauman as well, so this is untitled Dead Centers from '68. It's just lead, steel, and water, and what's actually been happening is sort of it's a play on like deadpan sort of minimalist work, using industrially produced material. Also, it's kind of like what you get, see is what you get, but it's not a static object. He actually drops water in the center, 1 drop a day, and it eventually corrodes the piece. So it evolves based on how it corrodes, and it's also this concept of relinquishing this sort of authorial control over your work, right? Just leaving it to the process. And I think Gerhard Richter actually is somebody that maybe is overlooked sometimes in terms of a chance practice. So in this work, Tote, he sort of decontextualized this image of a crime scene from a magazine, but he was actually highly influenced by Fluxus work and the Fluxus character, and he brought over the social realist style from East Germany, but he wanted to use it in a way that he didn't feel he was producing art. So he found that the least artistic thing he could do was to reproduce images found in popular culture and magazines and newspapers and that kind of thing. So it was actually it's sort of a weird relationship where you have a very traditional art practice of painting, and he's a very highly skilled painter, but trying to produce things that are non-artistic. And a lot of his sourcing the images was left to chance practices. There wasn't really a lot of premeditated thought going behind that. So. And then finally, I'll finish up here and just talk about the art in society. So I think with the Dada movement, they were very interested in a socially engaged, not just art for art's sake, and they subverted a lot of the ideas within the artistic community, but I think they saw their purpose as having a larger social goal to awaken people to kind of shake up this anestheticized public. So I think that's an important thing that a lot of, so many examples of that in 20th century and contemporary art. These are just a few that I saw along the way. So this is George Machunas. This is the USA surpasses all the genocide records. So this is from 1968. So Machunas was basically the central figure in the Fluxus movement. He was the one publishing the manifestos. The Fluxus really, it's very tough to define as a movement in the 60s and 70s. It kind of came out of John Cage, the composer, using a lot of just found sound, sort of the sound of everyday life. So they're really interested in sort of equating life to art in a sense, and not really thinking about art in terms of regular production, but being socially engaged, using everyday objects. They were very influenced by the Dada movement. But Fluxus, it's a very difficult movement to study because it's very few works are signed. They're very ephemeral. Very few remain. But this is one where he is obviously critiquing the states and their involvement in international atrocity, comparing them to Stalin and the Nazis, using the flag image. This was sort of the last work here. So this is Alighiero Goetti. This is Postal Voyages from 1969 to 1970. So he was a member of the Art Povera movement, which was they thought the everyday was meaningful. They tried to art equals life. They attacked established institutions, art institutions as well. So what he's doing here is taking this everyday practice of mailing and sort of equating with art. And what he's actually done here is he has travel itineraries that he labels and sends out. So these are all very, very well-known people in the art history. So what he's doing is he's actually, these itineraries he creates, he sends them out to the first stop on the itinerary. And then obviously they weren't there. He's not, working with these people at all. They weren't there. They get sent back to him. So what he'll do is he'll open it up. He'll find out the second place on the itinerary, send it to the second place. So it's about this big process of sort of trying to find someone who isn't there. So a really interesting sort of mix of like mail art, but also process-based art as well. But sort of this, this everyday practice of mailing and turning it into a larger sort of artistic project. And of course, Joseph Boyce, in terms of, he was a member of Fluxus, but also like very socially engaged. He thought art should have a larger social purpose. He saw the artist as healer. This is felt. So this is on display at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So this is felt soup. This is from 1970. So felt had a very important part of his practice. He was a World War II fighter that was actually shot down, and he tells the story of nomadic people in Russia taking him in, covering him with felt, covering him with fat, and he saw this as sort of like a healing process. It was very like sort of spiritual, rejuvenating process. So this talks about the absent artist. He's not there, but as being a healer with the felt. And at Dia Beacon there was a boys' installation where these are just layers of felt. I forget the name of this one. Layers of felt stacked on top of one layer, but they're meant to have this healing property. And actually, when you go between the stacks, it mutes all the sound around and creates this very sort of meditative environment. So it's supposed to create this sort of like very healing sort of effect. And that's all I have. If questions.
I have a question. I'm just wondering, do you think that the Globe, what was the beginning of the publication? Globe Data?
Data Globe, yeah.
Data Globe. So would you consider that to be a manifesto, much like the Flux manifesto?
I don't think I would consider that to be a manifesto. It was not really intended to sort of describe what data is going to be or put forth any sort of prescription of what it should be. It was really just sort of like sort of like a collection of everything, sort of very comprehensive. It wanted to show it as being very international, not confined by language or nationalist boundaries. So it's really supposed to show data in its entirety and not really have any sort of specific.
So they didn't have as many parameters in terms of inclusion of who would be considered part of Globe Data as, say, the Fluxus, who
for sure, yeah.
had
So
sort of these strict anti-art, anti-bourgeois,
definitely the data Globe, like those solicitation letters they sent out. Like there are a lot of very recognizable data artists, of course, but like lots of like abstract artists.